Today is a health online. We have from who are on present. They skip until we won, but if not, Inferno, they were both introduce your titles and welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself. And again, I want to stress to Senate members and so on, this is not a hearing on any of the bills. And as the legislature's considered sports betting over the years, I think there have been over 30 hearings over the last several years between House and Senate, all of which understandably focused on the specifics of legislation. And they also talked about who profits from sports betting. Unfortunately, none of them have focused on the health, economic, social harms that can result on Minnesota families and so on. And I'd like to, one more preface, and that is, I think we should be clear that sports betting right now, whether it's with friends or neighbors or strangers, it's currently legal in Minnesota. If you chose to bet on the Vikings-Lions game last week, you were perfectly free to do so. What we're talking about legalizing is the sports bookmaking industry, where people can come in and profit off of those bets and the harm that that causes. And so with that, if you're willing to start your presentation now, I'd appreciate that, and we'll go back to the researchers as soon as we can get our sound back in place. So who wishes to begin?
All right. Good morning. I'm Les Burnell. I'm the National Director for Stop Predatory Gambling. We're a national nonprofit organization in all 50 states in this country, and our mission is to stop the practice of predatory gambling, prevent more victims, and really take the effort to end these business practices that are harming millions and millions of American families. And you want to just quickly introduce yourself, and then or you want me to keep going?
Yeah, that sounds good. So thank you, first of all, Senator Marty, for inviting me to speak this morning. My name is Matthew Litt. I'm an attorney licensed to practice in New York and New Jersey. I became involved in stopping predatory gambling, manipulated gambling, approximately right after the pandemic, 2020, 2021. And I'll go into that a little bit more as we go through the testimony, how I got here. But because of the high-profile cases that I've brought, I receive phone calls and emails from addicted gamblers and their families all across the country every single day. I'm hearing stories about the personal and financial harms involved with sports betting.
Okay, thank you. All right, so our agenda with you today is we're going to briefly cover we have a few points here, a few slides to go through with you. Our agenda is we're going to define predatory gambling. We're going to talk about the so-called will prevent illegal gambling ruse. That is this phony narrative to push sports gambling in this country. We're going to get into the facts around VIP programs. We're going to focus on the deceptive tactics of gambling operators to minimize the perception of danger. We're also going to have a discussion on the lack of legal accountability that these gambling companies have for the harm that they cause. We're going to have a little focus on the third-party harm that's brought by online gambling operators. And the last couple of things here, we're going to focus on the metastasizing epidemic of teen and young adult gambling that is going across this country. And then we're going to look at what regulated gambling really looks like in Minnesota today. When we hear the term, we're going to regulate this. Forget what we're talking about in the future with sports gambling. Let's look at what quote-unquote regulated gambling already looks like in Minnesota. So we have a few slides to talk about that. So with that, I'm going to get right into how we define predatory gambling for those of you who are new to that language, who don't understand what that phrase means. So I'm going to start with what predatory gambling is not, all right? Because gambling interests will stand up here and say, look at all this illegal gambling happening. So what predatory gambling is not, it's not the Friday night poker game. You know, it's not bingo nights at the local Catholic parish in your district. You know, it's not the Super Bowl office pool. It's not your March Madness bracket. and it's not having a friendly wager on the golf course. Those are social forms of gambling. There's no house involved. Those are social forms of gambling. Okay, and the gambling industry goes out of its way to include, when they talk about illegal gambling numbers occurring in this country, they go out of their way to include these types of gambling as so-called illegal gambling. All these forms of gambling are already legal in Minnesota, okay? People are already doing this, been doing it for 100 years. So what predatory gambling is, okay? Predatory gambling is when powerful gambling corporations partner with state governments to use commercialized gambling. Gambling being run as a business, for profit, all right? And when gambling is run as a business, unlike any other business in the country, there's an adversarial relationship between the gambling operator and its customer, okay? They're trying to take you down. Okay, so that's a common thing. When we talk about, we compare this business like Starbucks or your local restaurant or going to a Minnesota Vikings game, it's the antithesis of that. This is a business that's based on taking you down. It's an adversarial relationship. And that's true for all forms of commercialized gambling when it's being done for profit. So what is predatory gambling? So what it is, we call it the big con. All right, many of the arguments that proponents use, they all fall under this big umbrella of the big con. And what it really is at its core is, and you see these images, it's what predatory gambling truly is, it's taking a known, dangerous and addictive product and then blending it with a fraudulent and manipulative financial scheme. That's what makes it so potent. So it's a highly addictive, but it's also a fraudulent and manipulative financial scheme. So some of you say, how is online gambling or these big-time commercial casino operators, how are they different than any other business? The reason, commercialized gambling at its core is a financial exchange, okay? So if I want to go see a Minnesota Vikings game, I buy a ticket to the game, I get that experience. Okay, I go buy a slice of pizza, I order a glass of wine, I order a bottle of beer. It's a one-for-one exchange. Commercialized gambling is a financial exchange that's mathematically stacked against you. They wrap it up as if it's entertainment and so on, but at its core, it's a financial exchange. All right, that's the essence of it. And it's a financial exchange that the longer you participate in it, the more frequently you participate in it, it's a mathematical guarantee you're going to lose all your cash. So this slide on that screen is the best visual I've ever seen. So that's actually for slot machines, how they work. But that business model is true whether it's state lotteries, commercial casinos, and especially online gambling operators. Is that the longer you participate in it, the more frequently you do it, it's a mathematical guarantee that over time you are guaranteed to lose all your money. So it's become a cliche now in American culture, but we just say, with casinos or the lottery, whatever, the house always wins. The house always wins. We all laugh it off. Like, what does that mean? It means you're going to get beat over the long term. And that's what makes it different. So when someone says like it's investing in the stock market, if you put $10,000 in the S&P 500 index fund or $1,000 in an S&P 500 index fund, over the next 30 years, that money's going to grow. Try putting $1,000 into online sports gambling bets over and over again, or $1,000 worth of $50 scratch-off tickets in here in Minnesota. Over time, you're guaranteed to lose all that cash. So that's the big con, part of the big con. And then the other big part of the big con, it's going to be part of this debate here in Minnesota and across the country, is like, hey, Les, I hear you on all those facts, but we're making money from this. Like, we're paying for school teachers, road construction, environmental protection, you name the social good, we're tying gambling revenue to that. Well, for all the non-gamblers out there who think you're benefiting from this, is you pay even if you don't play. Is consistently, the independent research around gambling revenues in government in this country, from state government, consistently show that over the long term, you, the non-gambler, okay, which is roughly 2/3 of the American public, including here in Minnesota, you end up paying higher taxes for less services over the long term. It's the ultimate budget gimmick. And so this is a major national report that was done by the State University of New York, Rockefeller Institute, Lucy Dedayan, who's now at the Urban Institute. She's the national expert in the country around government revenues from gambling. I encouraged the members of the Minnesota House and Senate to look at her research and emphasize that this is the ultimate budget gimmick. And the last point I'm going to mention before I turn it over to Matt here is part of the big con is because there's no grassroots movement for these forms of commercialized gambling, they have to come up with phony narratives. Hey, they're going to go out of state to do it. Or here now, the more recent one in online gambling, we're going to wipe out illegal gambling, right? We got to do this. We're going to wipe out all this illegal gambling. We're going to regulate it. Here are 3 quick points, and there's far more than these, but here are 3 quick points to show what a ruse the illegal gambling argument is. It's part of the phony narrative. Number one, the New York Times in November 22 did a high-profile investigative series into how online gambling operators were rolling out their product across the country. And it should have won a Pulitzer Prize for it. It was a Sunday before Thanksgiving in November 2022. In that, as part of that story, they uncovered how the American Gambling Association, which is the national trade lobby for the gambling industry in this country, they orchestrated this entire, quote-unquote, illegal gambling narrative to create a fake sense of momentum to help push through sports gambling. All right, it's a phony narrative. You don't have the FBI standing up here saying, we need to legalize this and regulate it to protect the American public. Those aren't FBI statistics. Those are statistics from the gambling companies themselves. All right, the next key piece is the National Trade Lobby, again, the American Gambling Association themselves wrote a letter to Merrick Garland, who's the U.S. Attorney General, back in 2022, after years of claiming we need to legalize online sports gambling to get rid of illegal gambling. So after 4 years of legalization, they're writing to the AG of this country saying, we got to crack down on this incredible rise in illegal gambling. Internet searches this is from their own letter to the AG. Internet searches for illegal gambling sites have gone up 38% in the last year, faster than the rate for searches for legal gambling sites, and so on. Those facts are all pretty self-explanatory there. But to fit their own letter, 52% continue to utilize illegal bookmakers. And searches for illegal gambling sites spiked as well. I mean, think about what a con that is. And the last big part of the con, this is my home state of Massachusetts. It was the headquarters for DraftKings. According to a study commissioned by the Massachusetts Gambling Commission, which is certainly friendly to the gambling companies in this country, their own study showed that in 2022, before legalization, 4% of Massachusetts residents were using illegal gambling sites, okay? 1 year later, after legalization, from their own study, that had spiked to 18% of Massachusetts residents were now using illegal sites. It increased more than 400%, okay? That's part of the con, it's part of the ruse. With that, I'll turn it over to Matt Litt.
Thank you, Les. So just a little bit of additional detail to contextualize my involvement and knowledge of the VIP host. I think it's also illustrative of the path that all the states have taken in the nascent stages of legalizing sports gambling. So I'm from New Jersey, where legalized sports betting all began. I have been a lawyer for 20 years with a focus on consumer protection. So I've always watched television commercials a little bit differently than everyone else. And as soon as sports betting was legalized in my state, I saw that the television was flooded with advertisements for risk-free bets. And I'm going to use air quotes for that. I don't like using air quotes, but I think that conveys the point. There was nothing risk-free about these bets. There's no definition of risk-free that would include what this offer was. It was at best risk mitigated, which of course doesn't roll off the tongue quite as easily, so it wasn't going to be used in their marketing. And so I started digging into this world of sports gambling without the emotional investment and without the frustration that I carry with me now. And I did that by reading everything I could, speaking with everyone I could. I even attended meetings. I attended Gamblers Anonymous meetings. I attended annual meetings to just try to understand this industry a little bit more. And what I soon realized was this was not about the risk-free bet. This was a public health disaster that was destroying real lives and real families. My watershed moment was a conversation I had with the chair at the time of the New Jersey Council on Compulsive Gambling. I spoke with him and I told him about 10 different items I saw that were troubling me about gambling advertising. And he shared with me that he had his own list and there were about 7 or 8 overlaps. He had about 7 or 8 things on his list that he saw that he shared with me. So I breathed a temporary sigh of relief. I said, great, I'm glad someone's working on this. And I said to him, so what is your organization doing about it? And he said to me, we're meeting with DraftKings next week, and we're going to ask them to stop. And I realized at that point that a jurisprudential solution was required because DraftKings was never going to stop by being asked. And so in August of 2021, I mailed a letter to the then 7 New Jersey casinos. I didn't even have a client, but I knew that something had to be done to stop this machine, or at least to do something, at least to slow it down. An advocate was required, and I wrote a letter to the 7 New Jersey casinos warning them that their advertisements were a violation of the New Jersey Consumer Fraud Act, and they better stop or litigation would follow. From that, as I mentioned earlier, I began representing high-profile clients, and I've now become a magnet for unfortunately desperate people who've lost everything and their families due to addicted sports gambling. So focusing more narrowly now on VIP programs. Yesterday, I was driving down the New Jersey Turnpike to the airport, to Newark Airport, to fly out here, and I saw billboard after billboard advertising sports gambling. And you see the billboards depicting a bunch of guys, having a great time, presumably watching a Jets or Giants or a Mets or Yankees game, and they're having a little extra fun because they have a stake in the outcome. They have a financial stake in the outcome now. And this is a representation of sports gambling in the abstract. It's harmless entertainment. That was the promise, and that has been the refrain. But in practice, that's not how it has worked in any of the 38 states where it's been legalized. And the primary cause of that, in my opinion, is the VIP host. As I said, I receive 10 to 15 emails and calls a week from addicted gamblers and their families, and almost every single one of them had a VIP host who led them to the dire straits that they find themselves in now. A player is given a VIP status and assigned a host when their deposits exceed a certain amount. Now, it's a secret algorithm, and it changes from time to time and from sportsbook to sportsbook. But basically, if you make one large deposit or a series of large deposits over a period of time, you achieve, and I'm using that word loosely, but that's the word they use, you achieve VIP status. And then you're assigned a VIP host. The level of deposits is in and of itself a sign of problem gambling and should be addressed as opposed to faux rewarded, but it's not. It's given a VIP host. The VIP host becomes this very, very strange and one-sided quasi-friendship with the gambler. Very perversely, there is this intimate relationship between gambling. The casino keeps, or the sportsbook keeps, and of course the VIP host has access to data on every single thing the gambler does, every deposit, every bet, every withdrawal. So the host knows when the gambler has a bad weekend. And instead of letting things play out through the natural course and saying, wow, I probably shouldn't have bet that much money this weekend, I'm going to take a break, the VIP host sends a text message. Real time, so we're talking real time. This isn't an email which you check when you get around to it. It's not a voicemail which you could ignore, it's a text message. And it says, hey, saw you had a bad weekend. Here's a free $500 bet on us. Always trying to keep them gambling. They don't only feed them free bets, but they give them incentives to gamble more, to deposit more and more. Hey, if you put in $5,000, we'll match it 25%. They send incentives through trips, all expense paid trips to every event you can imagine, Super Bowls, World Series, NCAA championships, all expense paid. And in many instances, the VIP host goes with them on these trips. They also send trophies and other gifts to congratulate, again, using that term loosely, congratulate the gambler for depositing certain amounts, equating depositing at certain levels with achievement. There's no achievement. All you did was lose more money. But this produces trophies and medals and other forms of congratulations. I spend a substantial part of every day now reading through text chains between gamblers and their VIP hosts, and it is absolutely horrifying. I know what it's going to say. I see the same pattern every single time. The addiction is crystal clear. And if I can see it, the VIP host certainly knows it, not only by practice, but many states require customer-facing employees of casinos and of sports books to know the signs of problem gambling. They know perfectly well that what they're seeing is the sign of problem gambling. And the number one sign that you're seeing through these text messages with a VIP host is a gambler begging for money, saying, I had a bad night last night. Can you please help me? They often use the term VIP love. Can you send me some VIP love? Begging for money. And the VIP host gives it. Instead of saying, hey, maybe you should cool down, maybe you need to take a break, maybe instead of just not responding at all, they're feeding them more and more money to make sure that they continue gambling. And to be clear, this is money in the form of free bets. It's not money in the form of a utility bill. It's money in the form of free bets. In what's become my most high-profile case, Amit Patel versus FanDuel, the VIP host gave Mr. Patel over $1 million in FanDuel credits in order to keep him gambling, in addition to the trips that I mentioned before, in addition to going with him on these trips. And this money is given in strategic increments to coincide with a bad run and to coincide with benchmarks. So the gamblers are told, if you gamble X number of dollars, well, then I can put in an extra Y into your account. Oftentimes, the VIP hosts tell the gamblers, I wish I could help you, but you need to be gambling at a higher level. You need to be depositing at a higher level. In another one of my cases, Antar versus BetMGM, the VIP host boasted on his resume that he is skilled at converting lapsed players. Lapsed players are players who are trying not to gamble. They should not ever be converted. These gamblers all show the telltale signs of gambling addiction through communications with their VIP hosts. I mentioned text message, and just to paint the picture, these text messages are happening not just daily, but oftentimes 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 times per day. There's no escaping it, and the text messages are happening first thing in the morning, late at night, on holidays. Again, displaying the clear hallmarks of problem gambling. There is no result with these individuals. There can be no result, but that they will hit rock bottom. And the VIP host knows it. There's no help for them. They will continue gambling until they cannot anymore. They will take the money from anywhere they can get it. At some point, the casino is going to realize that they've run out of their own money. They're going to stop giving them these incentives, and now everyone's at risk. Now any pool of money from which they can pull is at risk. And I think it's important to be clear that through the hundreds of people I've spoken with, there is no profile of the addicted gambler who's susceptible to the VIP host. There's no way to know who it is before they fall into the addiction. I receive calls from men and from women, from blue-collar workers, from professionals, older people, younger people, black, white. As an example, there's an article from the Wall Street Journal from last February 2024, a woman named Kavita Fisher, a psychologist who knows what the signs of problem gambling were. She knew she was a problem gambler, but she couldn't stop it. She fell into addiction. She fell into the VIP host trap because he kept giving her what she needed until she ran out of money, and then they walk away. I'm asked all the time, and it's an important question. Isn't it the gambler's fault? Aren't they responsible for themselves? Of course they are. But that responsibility is not exclusive. The casinos, through their VIP hosts, take an active role in the addiction, turning minor mistakes into catastrophic financial events for people and their families. And I think it's incredibly important to draw the distinction with VIP hosts between active and passive involvement. It's not, please don't take away from what I'm saying today that the casinos, and maybe they do, what I'm saying is it's outside the scope of what I'm talking about here. I'm not complaining that the casinos don't save addicted gamblers from themselves. What I'm saying is that they are taking, through the VIP host, a very active role in the addiction. And I think that's a critically important distinction. One of the things that's so frustrating, is that there is a blueprint for at least mitigating this damage, but it's a blueprint that no state in the United States is following. It's in the UK, it's in Ireland. They're years ahead of us, where some of the same casinos that are in the United States have voluntarily curtailed their VIP programs because they saw the damage it was doing over there. But they refused to do so here in the United States. And there hasn't been a state yet who's had the guts to make them do it. There's a model here within the U.S. legal system called dram shop for alcohol liability. Someone who serves a visibly intoxicated person or a business entity who serves a visibly intoxicated person is liable for the acts of that person. There should be the same thing here. The casino should be liable for their affirmative acts toward a visibly addicted person. And every casino will tell you that they have practices in place to ensure responsible gambling. In my experience, that's complete garbage. Responsible gaming through the VIP host consists of, and I'm not kidding, you're gonna think I'm leaving something out, but I'm not. This is what it is. They will ask someone who's been identified or red flagged as a potential addicted gambler, they say to them, are you gambling within your means? And if the gambler says yes, like, great, here's some more incentives. That's it. They ask an addict if they're addicted. And if the addict says no, which every addict does, they can proceed. They'll even send incentives while the question's pending. They'll ask the question on a Monday. The response may not come until a Thursday. In the intervening period, they'll continue sending incentives. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Les. Thank you.
Elspeth, there's a way to get our slide back on the screen real fast. So just fast on the data point on responsible gambling, 75% of the players, the question I love to ask anyone who stands up the gambling interests, they say, how much money do you make from people who practice so-called responsible gambling behavior? Roughly 75% of the people, the best data point done was by Natasha Shull in her book, Addiction by Design. Roughly 75% of the players were so-called, practiced so-called responsible gambling behavior. They contributed 4% of revenue. Okay, so when you hear all these campaigns about responsible gambling, they're irrelevant to the business model. Okay, and real quick, you won't see it's not on the screen at the moment, but we always love to use the comparison to the non-alcoholic beer industry and wine industry, right? It's a multi-million-dollar industry of people selling non-alcoholic drinks. Who's the gambling operator in the world that markets themselves as, hey, come gamble with us? We're the responsible gambling operator, okay? There isn't a single company in the world, never mind the United States, that markets himself that way because it's not financially viable. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it back to Matt to speak to the deceptive tactics of gambling operators to minimize the perception of danger.
Yeah, so there's really two components to this in my presentation here. There's number one, there's the general advertising, which normalizes gambling and makes it look like those billboards I mentioned. It makes it look like a ton of easy fun. It's just entertainment, like going to see a show or going to the movies. It normalizes it. There's a second level to that, which is the more subtle forms of advertising, where you have FanDuel or DraftKings sponsoring an update in the middle of a baseball game. So where I'm from, I'm right in between Philadelphia and New York, so I get both cities. In the middle of a Phillies game, they'll take a break during one of the commercials and they'll have, and I forget which sportsbook it is, it's FanDuel or DraftKings, and they'll talk about in the middle of the game what the spread is, the in-game spread or an in-game parlay, as if it's part of the game. All of these things normalize gambling and deceive the viewer into believing that there is no danger. There's also newspaper articles. Regularly, you'll see newspaper articles saying FanDuel's announced, deposit $5, receive a free $200, amongst the other things, amongst all the other newsworthy elements, as if of course it's paid advertising, but it's not presented that way. Then there's number two, which is the more devious form of normalizing and minimizing the perception, which is, I'm going to go back to the VIP host again. It's the specialty of the VIP host to assure the gambler in their private conversations that no one else knows about that big losses happen and it's normal. VIP hosts regularly console gamblers who are upset about how much they lost on the game last night by telling them, well, I have another client who lost even more. Or, listen, these swings happen, hang in there, here's a little bit more money. I mentioned earlier sending prizes in the form of free bets, deposit matches, trips, and trophies. The trophies in particular are an incredibly deceptive tactic to minimize the perception of danger. I have, and I'm not going to be able to describe it without the visual. I have a box that I took from a client of mine. It came from DraftKings. It's this big, heavy box. And you open it up, and it lights up. There's LED lights that light it up with a crown in it. And it says, it's emblazoned with the words, "The crown is yours." I like to believe I've achieved some things in my 20 years as an attorney. I've received a whole bunch of trophies and awards. I've never received anything like this. And all of this is intended to convey the idea that you've achieved something. It's all part of the idea that you're a family when you're with one of these casinos, and you're insulated by this family. There are now on a lot of these sports books, DraftKings has it prominently, I'm not sure which others do, a social media function where after you place a bet, you have the option of sending it into their social sphere, whatever the platform is, and sharing that bet with other people. And it allows other people then to congratulate you. Wow, you're so smart. I can't believe you made that bet. And then people will come to you and say, how did you know the Red Sox were going to win? Can you let me know what you're going to do tomorrow? I want to follow you. Things like this normalize it and make it seem like there's no danger. This is all good fun. There are actual in-person social events where people who have risen to the level of the VIP host level are invited to real-life social events with other gamblers where they talk about gambling and, again, reinforce the idea that what they're doing is okay and normal.
The next piece is the lack of legal accountability for the harms that the gambling operators cause. That's for Matt as well.
So, of course, this is my specialty, and I guess the bane of my existence currently. All of the above, everything I've talked about exists in all 38 U.S. states that have legalized sports gambling because of a perceived lack of legal accountability. There's not a state legislature yet that has addressed predatory gambling. So that's what I'm working on to change through the courts. But the problem is, without an explicit statement that the liability exists from the legislature, there are countless thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives, families, businesses being destroyed in the interim. So at the risk of some oversimplification, the law generally is that a casino is not obligated to save a gambler from themselves. But that law was made in the prehistoric brick and mortar days before people had access to 24-hour sports books in their pockets. And that law is also made, and this is to be clear, this is case law. It's not statutory law. It's case law. This law was also made before gambling addiction was understood the way that it's understood now, or at least since 2014 through the American Psychiatric Association, DSM-5, when it was classified alongside alcohol, opioid, and cigarette addiction. But the law has not yet adapted, and it needs to be. And in the meantime, the casinos are trying to take full advantage. The casinos were a part of what happened in Europe. They know that there comes a point, maybe 10 years from now, where we're not having this hearing. We're not having this conversation because everyone understands that gambling is as addictive and dangerous as opioids, tobacco, and alcohol. But man, in the meantime, they're going to try to get as much money out of the American public as they possibly can.
With that, Mr. Litt, I believe we now have the sound. We hope Mr. Hollenbeck is available. So I'm going to ask you to, and we were giving you a half hour and we're about there now. We can continue testimony later, but I want to go to the research studies and the other witnesses.
That's good.
Absolutely.
I appreciate the presentation very much, and with that, I'm going to lay that over to the side for now, and then we'll take up Dr. Brett Hollenbeck from UCLA. Dr. Hollenbeck, can you hear us?
Yes, and you can hear me now?
Now we can. Thank you. So, and Mr. Hollenbeck, we appreciate your being with us, and we're very sorry about the long delay because of the sound. But if you could go ahead and start your presentation now, that'd be very helpful.
Sure. Yes, and thanks for the invitation. So I'm going to summarize a recent working paper I've put together with my co-authors at USC. And we're motivated by the recent expansion in sports gambling. I don't think I need to tell this audience the details of that. And by prior academic literature, which finds that among people who participate in gambling, a small but significant proportion develop problematic gambling habits, which lead to financial stress and other negative outcomes. And also by the ongoing policy debate that I'm sure you're familiar with. In particular, we're interested in whether or not we can learn about some of these policy choices, in particular the use of in-person betting or the use of online or mobile betting. So in our paper, we study the impact of the spread of legal sports betting on consumer financial health in particular, that is longer run indicators of financial health. And we look at variation across states in policy choices, in particular the choice of allowing online betting, and see how that impacts the impact on consumer financial health. So we use this using a data set called the University of California Consumer Credit Panel, which is available to researchers at the University of California like myself. What this gives us is a very large and representative sample of U.S. households, and the data that we observe on these households are the same data that are observed by a major credit bureau. So it's things like credit score, your credit card accounts, potential delinquencies, loans that are held, delinquencies on those loans, other debt collection activity, and some demographic information. And we take from these 7 million, a subset of those who are not moving across state lines and are active during the whole period, and we end up with a sample of about 4 million people, and we follow these people for 7 years, from 2016 to 2023. And the goal of our research, compare the people in those states and track their financial outcomes and make this comparison here, which is states that only allow in-person betting, which is, I think, 7 or 8 states. And some of those that allow mobile betting implemented that at a later date than they implemented in-person betting. And so we're looking at that as well. So we're going to estimate what we hope is the causal effect of having legal sports betting in your state on your financial outcome variables. And we're going to focus on two types of what we would call treatment, which is any type of sports betting being allowed in your state. We call these all treated states. And then states that specifically allow online or mobile betting. And for these, like I said, we're focusing on the states that allow that, comparing them to the states that don't, and looking at the different timing of implementation. And the outcomes we're going to look at are overall financial health, indicators of excessive debt, and then access to credit. So I'm just going to show you all these results one by one in a visual format, so hopefully you can see these plots. So these plots show what happens to these financial outcomes after sports betting is allowed, either for, in the red line, the case of any type of sports betting, or in the case of the blue line, particularly the presence of online sports betting. And what you should look at is whether these lines diverge after the dotted line, which is when that takes place. Okay, so in this first plot, we're looking at credit scores, which are a summary measure of creditworthiness. And what we see is that there's no difference between the people in the states that are not allowing gambling and the states that are allowing gambling up until that point when it becomes legal. And then we start to see a negative trend in credit scores for the states that that have legalized gambling. And then this effect is about 3 times larger for the states that have online betting compared to the states that only have in-person betting. All right, so we see by the end of about 3 years after sports betting becomes legal, there's a significant decrease in the average credit score. All right, so I want to stress that these are the average for the full population. There's nothing about the credit bureau data that allows us to identify which individuals in the data are actually participating in gambling. I think Professor Baker's research has that ability, but we don't have that ability. So we are looking at the average for the full population in the states with gambling versus states that do not have it. All right, so this effect that we find is fairly small. I would say it's about a 1% decrease, which is about a seven literal points on your credit score. But I would also stress that that small effect is measured over the full population, and we don't expect that the majority of people in the state are even participating in legal gambling, let alone developing problematic habits. So it suggests that for the people who are potentially problem gamblers, they may be experiencing a very large decrease in their credit scores, so much so that it shows up in the average for the full population. Next, we look at the use of debt consolidation loans. So this is, a debt product that is used by people who have so much debt that they feel like they would benefit from consolidating it. And it's an indicator of excessive debt. Again, we find now an increase in the use of debt consolidation or potentially excessive debt. And this is on a small baseline, but the percentage change in the use of consolidation loans is about 9%. We also look at bankruptcies. Bankruptcies are rare events. Most people are not going bankrupt in any given quarter. We find, however, a fairly large percentage increase in the likelihood of going bankrupt. So we're going from one small likelihood to another small likelihood, but the percentage increase in that likelihood is actually quite large. We measure it as about 27%. And again, if you look at this figure, you'll note that the increase is much larger. It's almost entirely in the states with online sports betting, whereas states with in-person sports betting allowed don't necessarily see any increase in the probability that someone goes bankrupt. We also look at the amount of debt sent to collections agencies. So this is another indicator of excessive debt. If it's sent to collections agencies, meaning that it's sort of delinquent beyond the original creditor's ability to recoup it. And we see an increase in that growing to sort of an average of about 8% or about $30 of excessive debt on a mean of 360. So most people have a zero debt sent to collections agencies. The average across the full population is on the order of $300, and we see about an 8% increase in that. We also look at auto loan delinquencies, and we find a increase there. So we find a roughly 9% increase in the probability that an individual experiences an auto loan delinquency in a given quarter. Again, this is a rare event, but we find a large percentage increase in this likelihood. And when we look for credit card delinquencies, we do not find an effect there. It's possible even after several years that this decreases. We're a little hesitant to interpret that decrease after 3 years, but that is what it looks like. And then the last things we look at are measures of credit access. So in this plot, I'm showing you the cumulative credit card limits available to consumers in these states. So we're testing to see if credit card companies are reacting to the implementation of legal sports betting by reducing credit card limits to prevent some of the negative outcomes we've seen before, or sort of fend them off. And we actually do see decreases in credit card limits available in these states, suggesting that credit card companies, either by targeting individuals who are engaged in gambling or by targeting people who have the sort of demographic profile of gamblers, are seeing reduced access to credit. And then in a similar vein, we look at the ratio of secured to unsecured loans as a measure of credit access and the ability to get loans. And we see that this ratio increases, suggesting, again, that people are finding it a hard time to get unsecured loans. All right, this table simply summarizes the results I've just shown you in visual form, and I will conclude by summarizing. So we do see evidence that legal sports betting decreases consumer financial health across a range of different indicators, with the much larger impacts coming from the ability to place bets online or through mobile apps compared to offline or in-person betting facilities. These average effects are usually quite small, as we would expect, given that we're measuring across the full population and not for individuals who are gambling necessarily. But the cumulative effect of some of these is still quite large. So our back of the envelope calculations suggest that the increase in bankruptcies would translate to about 30,000 additional annual bankruptcies, or an additional about $8 billion in debt sent to collections agencies across these states that have legalized it. And I should note, we've looked a little bit at demographic heterogeneity, and have found some suggestive evidence that young men are particularly harmed, but mostly these results are inconclusive. So I will conclude there.
Thank you, Professor Hollenbeck. I had two real quick questions. I want to move quickly, but on the access to credit, you said the impact on credit card limits. You said that was, these reduced amounts were statewide in those things, or was this for people who were profiled as gamblers?
Yeah, so these are, again, average effects for the population. So we see average credit card limits decreasing in these states. Tell from our data whether how those credit card limit decreases are targeted, whether they're on the basis of demographics, of past spending, or of, the credit card companies literally observing you using betting apps and therefore being less likely to extend credit to you.
Thank you. And the other one, real quickly, on your bankruptcies chart, the 27% increase. In other words, if I'm in a state that has legalized online sports betting, the average bankruptcy filings increased by a quarter over several years? Statewide, in
Yes.
other words, not just for gamblers, but for statewide, the bankruptcy rate.
Yes, yes, that's the correct interpretation.
Any other questions, Kalimi? If not, thank you very much, Professor. I really appreciate that.
I will stop sharing my screen, so.
Thank you. I think this is first, I don't know if you've presented elsewhere at other legislatures, but I appreciate your being with us this morning.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Professor Scott Baker from Northwestern University, are you able to hear me as well?
There we go.
Thank you.
You can all see my screen, hopefully.
Yes, we can. And members of the
Right.
committee, just so you know, these presentations are all in the packets.
Great.
Oh, this one's the one that's not. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, this one was not. It was a late edition. I apologize. But yeah, thanks for very much for having me. Very happy to be here. I've read the other professors' work, and I think all three of us kind of have some hopefully timely additions. As Professor Hollenbach mentioned, we're bringing to the table a little bit of individual transaction data. So we're able to use anonymized bank and credit card transaction data to actually observe directly deposits and withdrawals from sports books or online sports betting sites across the country as these legalizations have kind of rolled out state to state. And there is a lot we can see at an aggregate level in terms of just the massive growth in sports betting in general, based on administrative statistics. We're hoping to be able to unpack that a little bit, understand some of the individual impacts, and relate it to some of the other financial choices that these households are making. So overall, this paper that myself and co-authors have been working on, we're using these bank and credit card transaction data for several 100,000 U.S. households. We try to characterize these sports bettors, and I'll go into that a little bit. Overall, I think our results are very consistent with the previous presentation, in the sense that we find kind of negative financial effects on these households, especially those that are actually engaging in sports betting, not just at a state level. And in particular, we find large declines in financial investments. So this is things like contributions or deposits to stock market accounts. We find that these negative effects are typically larger for financially constrained households, and that we find some negative debt effects as well. So, run-ups in credit card balances, these individuals are more frequently overdrawing their account in the post period. And we're able to see a lot of financial attributes of these individuals, before and after they bet, and whether they are a bettor or not. So overall, we see about 7% of the population engaging in some form of sports betting post legalization. And we find that bettors and non-bettors are pretty similar in terms of income, savings, and debt. So it's not just people who are already financially constrained engaging in sports betting, but a pretty wide swath of the population. They are more likely to be, previously have gambled in other observable ways, playing online poker or the online lotteries or buying cryptocurrency or things like that. But it's important to note that a majority of these people who start sports betting, are not observed to be previously betting through other means. This is not just substituting one form of gambling for another. The other thing that we can see, we don't have great demographic information, but we can see some indicators of age and gender or having children or things like that. This isn't just young men in college betting. This is a pretty wide group. So actually more likely to say have received a child tax credit and have children than non-bettors are. We're also able to dig into some of the aggregates a little bit. We find that most people are not depositing money once. Most people are depositing into the sports betting apps multiple times. About 40% over 10 times in our sample, and this is kind of growing because a lot of these state legalizations are pretty recent, and we only have data up to kind of mid 2023. So for some of these states, we only see a year or so after legalization. And people bet very persistently. So, this is looking at the probability of depositing money again from your bank account to a sports betting site each quarter after your first bet. And so, by mechanically, that's 100% in the first quarter, but then, every other quarter since then is basically 50 to 60% of people are choosing to, make another deposit in that quarter. And so this adds up. This is kind of a cumulative graph, based on the first deposit. Over the next few years, they're typically depositing, 8 to 10 times that on average. And I think, some of the previous witnesses have said, this is a very concentrated kind of, problem or a concentrated group of people. There's a, 2/3 or 3/4 of people are betting relatively small amounts, maybe putting in money once, but this is extremely skewed, and the top decile, the top 10%, the top 25% are putting in thousands and thousands of dollars, and that kind of continues to grow over time. We also find that this is kind of exposure is higher for lower income people. They're betting bigger fractions of their income or depositing bigger fractions of their income relative to high income bettors, and this is kind of persistently true over time post legalization. We're using some kind of basically trying to compare states that have legalized with states that have not legalized, or individuals that are prone to betting with individuals who are not prone to betting, to get kind of a causal treatment effect. And we find large effects on other financial outcomes. So this is just looking at the amounts of betting over time before and after legalization. And there's not much betting going on before legalization, as you might expect, and then there's a big jump and a continued ramp up over time. And that's both new bettors starting to bet, but also existing bettors, or if you started betting in quarter one, you're kind of betting more and more over time. And so that leads to this large increase that's still ongoing. We'll see maybe when it plateaus for some of these states that have only recently legalized. One of our headline results is that this leads to kind of big declines in equity investments. And this is kind of across the board. It's not just in Robinhood accounts, but this is reducing deposits going to your Fidelity and Vanguard, long savings that are meant for kind of retirement or kind of long-term savings. Those start to decrease, and they decrease in sizable amounts, about a dollar per dollar. So every dollar of betting that we observe for individuals leads to about $1 decline in net investment. And some of this is coming directly from the deposits being made to betting sites, those increases in deposits to betting sites are not being offset elsewhere. This is not just a reallocation of a household's entertainment spending. We actually find that other sorts of entertainment spending, be it restaurants or cable subscriptions or like going to sports games themselves, increases alongside the betting. And so this kind of displaces some of those longer term investments. We also, as I mentioned, find that this falls disproportionately on individuals who are already constrained. So if we look at people who had lower levels of savings or who had been overdrafting in their checking accounts prior to gambling legalization, we find that the effects are much bigger in those households. And then we find very consistently with the previous presentation that some of this falls through into their kind of debt and credit balances as well. So there's kind of a reduction in financial health across the board. Credit card balances go up, and overdrafting activity, so overdrawing a checking account, increases after gambling is legalized or after people start betting. So I think overall, I mean, this. Gambling is obviously very, popular pastime, but I think, we have to consider some of the financial ramifications for households. We do find some reductions, quite sizable reductions in investments, which is often something, state and federal governments are trying to really encourage. And a lot of this burden seems to fall on more financially constrained households who might already be struggling in other things. And I 100% agree that the vast majority of this effect is seen in places with mobile sports betting rather than kind of on-premises or in-person sports betting. And I think that one reason that people are displacing investment behavior is, this is based on some survey evidence, that they do tend to overestimate their ability to kind of outperform others. And
Senator Johnson Stewart.
Just a very, the testifiers are talking about deposits. That's the money they put into their gambling account, or could somebody just?
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. So these are deposits to their sports gambling site. We cannot see within the site. But the fact that they are usually depositing kind of repeatedly indicates to us that most of those are losses. And you can look at administrative data, just the fact that there are large kind of margins being made. But you're absolutely right that some of those people, if they're just maintaining a huge balance on the sportsbook app, then that is some financial assets potentially that we are not able to observe.
Senator Friends online has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, we've had some audio difficulties. Can everybody hear the online speakers okay?
Yes, we can hear you now very clearly.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the testifiers. I'm a yes on the sports betting bill and wanted to offer a comment or two on the hearing. I appreciate the perspective, especially insofar as we're trying to protect certain Minnesotans from harm. We do that as a state government without trying to intrude. The simple fact is, we have had testimony this morning largely ignoring the fact that many Minnesotans want to do this. I appreciate Mr. Baker's comment in the last 60 seconds, which is that it's very popular. We are a state government being asked to implement policies that are very, very popular. A couple points, Mr. Chair, I'd just like to put on the record. First of all, to the earlier testifier about the proprietors of sports gambling, I want to just remind the members on the panel that a principal partner in our attempt to legalize sports betting are the Native American tribes of Minnesota. And to the extent that the testimony was that they were trying to take people down, that it was a big con, I think we should consider a little more nuanced language. I think those Native American tribes are tremendous partners and who consider themselves to be responsible purveyors of sports betting if it's legalized, and currently casino operators that are sensitive to those 1% to 8% of Minnesotans or patrons who have some issues. I guess, at the end of the day, Mr. Chair, I think what we should have as a goal is to see a bill passed that responsibly addresses the latest concerns that states have. I appreciated the candor in the testimony that 1% to 8% of gamblers are so-called problem gamblers. I think we should focus on them, how to protect them and how to help them. I'm open to the discussion as an author of the sports betting bill with Chief author, Senator Matt Klein, to how we can do that. If we accept those numbers, I hope we will likewise accept that 92 to 99% of Minnesotans would not fall into the category. And for those, especially those in my district who've been urging passage of sports betting, my answer is we are trying to do it in a way that's responsible and respect those harms. At the end of the day, I think what many Minnesotans are asking are simple questions like, you can legalize marijuana but not gambling? And the question of whether the government is taking too many steps to impinge on the freedom of Minnesotans. With that, Mr. Chair, I do appreciate the hearing. I appreciate the testimony. Look forward as an author of the bill to working with every member of the Senate and the House to see what we can do, and hope that we'll continue to take responsible perspectives on what the entire state is talking about, including the basic fact that a lot of Minnesotans want us to do this. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members.
Thank you, Senator French, for your comments. I don't think there was a question for Professor Baker there. So Professor Baker, I want to thank you as well for your testimony. Very much appreciate your participating with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Senator Marty, or
Senator
Mr.
Johnson Stewart,
Could I ask one follow-up question for
please.
Dr. Baker? Dr. Baker, I realize this wasn't in your testimony, but I have a question about the VIP host that we heard earlier. Are you aware of this being automated, or is typically the VIP host a human? Do you have any insight into the role that the VIP host plays?
Sure. Senator Johnson Stewart, unless Professor Baker, if you want to respond to that, you're welcome to. Otherwise, we can have Mr. Litt, who brought that up, we can have him back. No.
Yeah, just briefly, I understand the VIP host is kind of a human separate thing. There are a tremendous number of kind of automated things to push kind of promotions to individuals. But I think the VIP host is a human, but I could be corrected on that.
So thank you. Again, thank you, Professor Baker, for being with us, and we will have Mr. Litt respond to that later. Now we have Emily Arneson from the University of Oregon. I hope you are still with us and able to participate, and I see you are on the screen, and your presentation is beginning. Welcome to the committee. Thank you very much for your patience after the technical glitches.
Thank you so much for having me. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. So my name is Emily Arneson, and I am a PhD candidate in the economics department at the University of Oregon. This is joint work with another PhD candidate in the economics department, Q Matsuzawa. And today I'm going to talk to you about sports betting legalization and what it can do, not in financial terms, but in potential crime terms. And so what we look at, and I always preface when I talk about this paper, is it is a sensitive topic because I will be talking about intimate partner violence. So I just want to put that little asterisk before I begin. So in our paper, we look at the amplification that sports betting can have on emotional cues that then would lead to intimate partner violence. So we look at a very common setting that has been used to study intimate partner violence before, the National Football League. This is the same setting that was used in a previous paper, a paper by Card and Dahl. David Card is a Nobel Prize-winning economist, and they published a paper in 2011 talking about how NFL home team upset losses can lead to intimate partner violence. And so the other reasons why we would use the NFL in this setting is it's the most viewed sport in the United States. Approximately 18 million people view NFL games on average, but it's also the most bet on sport in the United States. And so a lot of bettors across the US place at least one bet on the NFL at some point in their betting lifetime. And there's a lot of money wagered per NFL game in just the regular season. Of course, there's more wagered on postseason games, but we're only going to focus on the regular season games. And finally, we focus on the NFL because it's a great situation to look for counterfactuals for us. NFL games happen weekly, whereas if we were to look at, say, an NBA game or even an MLB team, you have games happening multiple times a week, which then for our econometrics identification poses some challenges. And so our question is, does the effect of an upset loss by potentially your favorite NFL team become larger when sports betting is legal? And so in our paper, we're the first to study this causal relationship. There's some descriptive evidence and papers about gambling and intimate partner violence, but there's nothing about gambling legalization and intimate partner violence. And so we find a larger effect, approximately 10 percentage points, when there is an upset loss and your home team is that team that experiences the upset loss on intimate partner violence when sports betting is legalized. To put this in context, upset losses are relatively rare in the NFL. So between 2011 and 2022, the Minnesota Vikings only had 8 upset losses. So less than 1 upset loss per season on average. Through this, we're able to do some back of the envelope calculations, and we find that this translates to approximately 16 to 31 additional instances of IPV during the 2022 season. We are only able to measure one type of IPV and one way that we can measure IPV. There's many ways, which I can talk about here in a moment, but we're only able to measure one, so the effect may be significantly larger. We also do some analysis looking at, is this due to financial losses, or is it due to people just being more upset? And so we do some work looking at mobile betting versus in-person betting and how that can play into all of this. So just a little bit of background. There are 2 things we look at. We look at economic shocks in terms of the legalization of sports betting, and if you potentially lose money, that's an economic shock. There's a bunch of economic shocks studied by economists, whether it's the Great Recession or you lose money in the stock market. There's a lot of different ways that your wallet or your bank account can be shocked. Furthermore, there's a huge literature on emotional cues. So emotional cues can be good and emotional cues can be bad. If you're sitting in LA traffic that's worse than normal, you may get frustrated and have some anger from that, which may lead to instances of intimate partner violence. The other emotional cue that I want to touch on just briefly is when your favorite team loses in a sporting event. So Cardin and Dahl again study the NFL and upset losses from that and how that leads to intimate partner violence. Cardassian co-authors look at the NBA. So this has been studied not only in the NFL, but also in other sports. So just briefly again, Cardin Dahl find that when there is an upset loss by an NFL home team, instances of intimate partner violence increase by 10%. They look at a time period before sports betting is legal in any state except Nevada. And so this doesn't have any thoughts of sports betting or what could go on when you legalize sports betting. And you've seen maps before. Just to give a little bit of clarification on what we're looking at, is we're only looking at in-person or mobile betting legalized in a state that is not only on tribal lands. So as you may see, the state of Washington and the state of New Mexico, for example, are not highlighted. And that's just due to them only legalizing sports betting on tribal lands. So we also study online sports betting, and the dates of those play into our analysis as well. We look at NFL game spreads. So just a basics on sports betting and what a spread is. If you have a higher spread for a game, that means that a team is supposed to win by more. A negative spread means your team is supposed to win. And so we're able to use these spreads that we get off NFLoddshistory.com and then construct if a team is supposed to win, if they're supposed to lose, and what happens with the actual game outcome. And so if your spread is less than -4, so -5, -6, you are favored to win. And this is the same framework that Cardin Dahl used. And if your spread is between -4 and 4, it's going to be what they consider a close game and what we consider a close game, where it's really too close to call who the winner of the game is going to be. We get final scores from ESPN.com. And so then we can make measures of upset loss, close loss, and upset wins. So we're really interested in these upset losses where you're favored to win, but then you lose. We use crime data. So this is one source of data that you can measure IPV through. There are other ways that IPVs can be reported, say the National Domestic Violence Hotline, but we only are able to use this one data set in our analysis. So NIBRS is the National Incident-Based Reporting System. So this is a data set compiled by the FBI. And so we're able to get data of police incidences. So this is where the police are called. An arrest isn't necessarily made. And through this, we get approximately 8,500 police agencies that cover approximately 146 million Americans. These police agencies are spread across the country. Some of them are small city police departments. We have county sheriff's offices in our data set, and we also have state-level state patrol offices as well. So we are able then to map our crime data to NFL data. And so we define an NFL home team as, from each county, the closest NFL team to each county. And so we basically take NFL stadiums and draw big circles around them until they capture every single county in the United States. And it looks something like this. On the map, and we draw circles. We get large coverages of certain teams. Some teams in the north have smaller coverage just because they're more concentrated there. When we include our data on IPV incidences, that leads us to keep the counties that are highlighted here in color. So all of these counties have some police agency reporting under NIBRS. We use a strategy that is a tried and true econometrics empirical strategy, a two-way fixed effects model. Basically, we are comparing states that have betting. We are looking at when a team experiences an upset loss versus on a Sunday versus a Sunday when there is no NFL game played during the NFL season. We make some assumptions, and the biggest assumption that I want to draw your attention to is people have changed their gambling behavior since the legalization of sports betting. So we want to assume that people actually are uptaking and deciding to sports bet through this. And so there's a lot of statistics I could throw at you, but the other thing I wanted to highlight is what happens in Google Trends. So we get data from Google Trends. So Google releases data on searches. And so we're able to look at search by states and how it increases for a bunch of different terms. So I've highlighted here two terms, sports betting and sportsbook. As you can see, the 0 and the dashed red line, that's when sports betting is legalized in the state. And the searches both for sports betting and sportsbook increase. Sportsbook, after the legalization date, there is a persistent effect of people still searching for it. And so that's something that I wanted to highlight of people within the states. When we estimate our model, what I want to draw your attention to is that second row. And that row shows us the percentage increase in instances of intimate partner violence when there is an upset loss and betting. And so at a state loss, you can look at that first row. Then we see approximately a 10 percentage point of intimate partner violence. We do a little bit of heterogeneity analysis, and I'll get to that in a second. But the first thing I wanted to talk about is this just a displacement effect of crime. So maybe these people were going to commit crime anyway, and maybe they were going to instead versus get in a and we haven't dove into this completely, but we actually see bar of sports betting upset loss. We don't see that other, so just something to note through our analysis. We look at the difference, and this has been talked about today a couple of times, but we look at the difference between the effect when we have mobile betting versus in-person betting, and we really see that our effect is so when there's an upset loss on mobile betting, intimate partner violence instances increase approximately 18 percentage points. look at different things such as market size. The median state, we divide that by the state's population. That number is approximately $20 in our sample period. And so when we are looking at that, states that have more betting and more dollars bet have higher rates of intimate partner violence when there is an upset loss. We a study first and third week of the month. If people are paid twice, we make this assumption that people are paid twice in the month, as income may be more salient then. And we look at what happens to upset losses then as well, in terms of intimate partner violence. And there's approximately a 24 percentage point increase when there is a pay week. And then lastly, we look at this idea of if a team is persistently winning, or in our paper, we also look if they're persistently covering their spread. And so if they've won their past couple of games, the team is on a hot streak and they can't lose. When they experience an upset loss, that emotional cue may be stronger, and we find evidence of that here, specifically when they won their last two games, and then there's an upset loss. We see that intimate partner violence instances go up by approximately 20 percentage points. And so that is all I have for you today. I really appreciate your time here, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Ms. Arneson. Are there any questions from members of the committee? If not, I very much appreciate your hanging around for a long time for this, and sorry the technical things took so long to get fixed. Thank you very much. We're running low on time. We're going to have Ms. Susan Sheridan Tucker. We'll have Craig Johnson, and we're going to have a couple of very brief testimonies from people in treatment. Welcome to the committee.
Good morning. The Executive Director of the Minnesota Problem Gambling. And I appreciate the opportunity before you this morning. The Alliance has been around since 2001. We are the state affiliate to the National Council on Problem Gambling, and our work is about supporting and advocating for those who are directly impacted by gambling. One of our core principles, we fully support comprehensive consumer protections for all those who choose to gamble. We also need Minnesota to advocate for and increase the funding for problem gambling and gambling disorder services. Do receive donations from gambling entities. In fact, we are completely dependent upon dollars generated from gambling revenue. And I want to acknowledge that we receive funding from MIDA, the lottery, charitable gambling, running aces, and DraftKings. And in fact, we're working on a project right now to educate their on the signs of problem gambling and what they customers. But at the same time, as I acknowledge the importance of those, it has really allowed the industry to have some influence on adding consumer protection. But I would urge you as legislators not to rely heavily on the industry's call for lack or self-regulation. Our duty to the people of Minnesota is to pass legislation that will include best practices in consumer protection and gambling disorder services. And I applaud Senator Marty for his efforts to bring us together today. Since 2018, when the sports betting bill was lifted, this is really the first opportunity we've had to publicly address the consequences associated with gambling addiction. And who would get a piece of the pie. With the proposed Senate sports emphasize the additional revenue while not addressing the social costs that currently exist and will likely increase with the expansion of. We're not even beginning to address the impact that gambling has on families. Children exposed to gambling at an early age have a greater likelihood of developing an addiction as they age. We're also not addressing the trauma that families undergo when they discover a loved one who has a gambling disorder has overturned their world. Housing, jobs, schools, relationships, health, and financial stability are negatively impacted. And many children are subjected to living under conditions where a parent or parents are not able to care for them, generating generational issues may result in the need of mental or behavioral health services down the line. And fewer safety resources to prevent financial ruin, and they are the most impacted by problem gambling. And even without legalized sports betting, 200 gambling right now, and over 6,000 high school students. And additionally, for every gambler, 8 to 10 individuals are impacted by their addiction. So that equates to about 2 million Minnesotans. And we're not really talking about this issue. We have managed to keep it bare minimum in terms of funding the various services that really are required in order to help people who have become addicted. We have no prevention materials in the schools. My colleagues across the country in which sports betting has been legalized have seen huge increases in their helpline calls and the need for outpatient services. They've seen a significant increase in young men, 18 to 30, seeking help with sports betting, and I receive calls from mothers who are worrying about their university sons who are sports betting, and we offer a free subscription to Gamban, which blocks about 30 to 60,000 worldwide sites. We offer that free because it's at least a single tool that we can provide to help stem somebody's addiction. And we don't have a lot of data that I'm able to produce it, but I will tell you that according to NCPG, while substance abuse is 7 times more prevalent, so there's no equity here. We're not looking like ourselves against substance use disorder or mental health, but there is more funding that is needed for these services. And did you know that 65% of gambling, we do no screening and we don't train or mental health providers, an elective program. That is not sufficient as well. A behavioral health issue. And so as we have concerns about, and you're about to hear some testimonies from a tiny source of addiction. The time allotted will not do justice to their stories, but as I want you to be their testimony and to set any preconceived. This is a real addiction. People don't, this isn't part of a moral failure or a lack of willpower. We need to recognize it and see it as such. And it seems like everybody wants to sport. Again, we're not for or against the legalization of it, but if we are going to pass a sports betting bill, we want to make sure that we have the best consumer protections right now that could be instituted, and any of those that are available. And as a state, we didn't rush in like other states. So let's really be thoughtful about this and take on the in being the best and doing the best for its people. And I think there's great opportunity here. With that, I would just ask that you see gambling disorder and as a real addiction, and remain committed to our mission to support and advocate on behalf of those who are negatively impacted. And I thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Ms. Sheridan Tucker. I'm going to quickly call up Craig Johnson because we have several more people we want to go through for everything. But thank you, Ms. Sheridan Tucker, for being here and for provider. Could you speak and introduce what's the
Yeah, thank
people
you.
coming up?
Mr. Chairman and members of this committee. Yes, I'm a certified gambling treatment provider at Club Recovery, which is in Edina. I'm also certified by the International Gambling Counselors Certification Board as a level 2 gambling treatment provider. I'm a state certified gambling treatment provider. And the class that Susan mentioned at Metropolitan State is a class that I teach. I've been doing this now for about 10 years. Treating gamblers. I'm a licensed alcohol and drug counselor as well. The effect of this disease on individuals is as profound as any addiction that you can encounter. The common question I get is, why can't they just stop? It's like any other addiction. They can't. A gambler will sit in front of a slot machine and throw $100 bills. Doesn't matter whether they're losing, they're in the game. The mental health issues associated with gambling disorder are profound. Most struggle with anxiety and depression. Many gamblers use gambling as an escape from, we heard the presentation on domestic violence, sorry. Also, there is a common co often is either alcohol or meth. In front of a slot machine for hours if you're high on meth. The most significant, I think, statistic is the suicide rate of persons that engage in gambling disorder, which is approximately 20%. That either think about or have committed the act of suicide. In the last year, I have had 3 clients attempt suicide, 1 4 times, all related to gambling. So this isn't just a lack of willpower. It isn't just they don't know any better. It's a serious disease which is chronic, and the best we can do with this is get it in remission.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And I think some of the witnesses you have who are
Yes.
testifying by Zoom, some of them have been patients of yours?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that those are more impactful. I could do this for hours, but it's not why you're here.
Okay.
So,
Well, thank you very much
you're
for
welcome.
coming and for helping connect us with them. I'm going to quickly have, I think, about 2 to 3 minutes of testimony from each of several people. First one, because I know some of the online people have been trouble hearing. I'll call a person identified as Celia.
Hello, I'm Celia. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I thank you for allowing me to join today. And I know that we have a very brief period of time here, so I'll try to go quickly. But I just wanted to share my story. I have My husband has been a gambler and compulsive gambler, and this has been going on about 40 years at this time. He's now in recovery. He's been in recovery on and off over the last 40 years. What I wanted to mention was a few things that at first, when you're dealing with this issue and you're young, you don't even know that, what kind of a problem is this? Is it a problem? You don't even know really how severe the gambling is because it's hidden. The person will, go to extremes to hide what's going on from their family until you get to that point where you discover it and then they're gone overnight because they're chasing their losses, which is a really common thing for gamblers, which gets them more and more in debt, obviously. So, you don't know what to do at first when you discover this. And, there were resources available to us when we looked into it, but it wasn't very public. It wasn't something that you hear about commonly. But we did find GA. I started Gam-Anon, but did not continue with that, which I regret. And I bring that up at our meetings frequently now so that young people that are joining our Gam-Anon meetings can hear it's really important to continue so that you can understand how this is affecting you and make changes in your own life. But you deal with it, lots of stress in the household because there's the constant lying. There's frequent blaming of other people in the household by the gambler. And it's at a very intense level because they're trying not to admit that this is happening to them. And for us, our daughters, there was a lot of conflict around this in our household, and it has really hurt the relationships. I have one daughter who has some pretty significant mental health issues related, as she went to counseling, has learned that it's an impact, the consequence of living with a gambling addiction in her father. And so she's working on that now. But it's very painful for people and the house, the family, including the gambler. So I would say that, fear and anxiety builds up in the family members, and that's something that, it's really difficult. It's been really difficult to overcome, and it's not a disease that's easily or quickly treated, the gambling or for the people that are non-gamblers. It takes years to work on recovery from this. There's a lot of shame, a lot of despair. So after many times of getting help and then him regressing, getting help, regressing, I finally did join Gam and learned about setting boundaries and things like that. But now I have grandchildren, and I know many of you probably have children and grandchildren. But what I see is, this sports betting is going to it's so easily accessible for them that it's going to increase, the gambling problems that people have. And we're going to see, I think people testified to this earlier, there's going to be a big increase in problem gambling for people. And I'm very fearful about what's going to be happening for our young people
Thank you.
in relation to gambling. It seems like we have this, with the gambling industry, and where are we balancing that out? How are we, providing enough education, information about the problems of gambling to people, to young people, to old, middle-aged people, to older people? I don't see that. I don't see it publicly being talked about. So we just allowed a lot of advertising to happen for those that are sponsoring the gambling, and I would ask that you consider that.
Ms. Seelig?
Lastly, I just share that, who is this for? Who is the online gambling for? Who does it benefit? Does it really, the winnings that people make are probably 90% of it is going to the gambling establishment. So who is it for? It's tilted way more in the line of the gambling establishment than it is the gambler. And
Thank you.
it's the, where do we stop? So with that, I'll pass. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your story, and I'm very sorry to hear what your family's been going through. Can I have quickly more, a person named Leanne? Please keep it to 2 minutes if you can, please.
Hi, I'm Leanne. For over 20 years, I've been struggling with the gambling addiction that has caused constant feelings of guilt, shame, embarrassment, anger, frustration, and low self-esteem. I'm always irritable, impatient, my mood is unpredictable, and I have seriously considered ending my life on numerous occasions. I became addicted at 18 when I put $20 into a video poker machine and hit 1,000. The feeling was euphoric, and I was instantly obsessed with the idea of winning easy money. Blackjack became my game of choice, and I was desperate for the dopamine rush it gave me. There were times I'd go 3 days without sleep on gambling binge. It consumed my life, affected my studies, and isolated me from friends and family. When I was 20, I reluctantly went to an inpatient treatment. In 2009, at the age of 22, I graduated from college, and shortly after, my dad passed away from cancer. My drug addict and alcoholic boyfriend was abusive, but I refused to leave him. My addiction came back with a vengeance. My bets were larger. I discovered I could take cash advances from credit cards, and I went into large amounts of debt. I cared about winning, but only because it allowed me to continue playing, and I would never leave until every last dollar was gone. Gambling was a way to escape the pain of my reality, but it was also a way to punish myself for not living up to my own expectations. By 24, I was forced back into inpatient treatment, and when I got out, I began my corporate career, ended things with my abuser, started seeing a counselor, and spent less time in money gambling. But by 28, I was back in the casino regularly with a new boyfriend who also became addicted. After several months of destruction and turmoil, I ended the relationship and tried hard to stay away from the casino. At 30, I met my now husband, and we married at 33. Then came the stress of marriage, kids, pressures from my career, home ownership, and discovering my husband had a drinking problem. And I coped by heading to the casino every month or two, each time losing more than the last. I would set high limits for what I'd allow myself to lose and would lose double, triple, or quadruple the amount. In 2023, I lost over $80,000 at the casino. I thought I'd hit my rock bottom, and I stopped gambling and focused on my marriage and my 2 baby girls. But then in April of 2024, at 37, I saw an ad on Facebook for an online casino. I ended up hitting $1,000 with the free sign-up money, and then online slots consumed my life for 9 months. I could play for however long I wanted, whenever I wanted, and spend as much money as I wanted, since they accepted credit cards and I had access to over 6 figures in credit. I had a VIP host who would load money into my account constantly and call me just to chat and say hi. Automatic promos and more money would be sent after every big loss. I took the bait every time, which always resulted in me depositing more large sums of my own money. I've withdrawn over $200,000 of my retirement savings for online gambling, spent $25,000 work bonus, and have racked up over $30,000 in credit card debt in these last 9 months. December 2nd, 2024 was my last bet. That day, I was in a trance, like a robot, depositing $1,000 every 5 minutes for 5 hours straight. When the reality of what I had done hit, I wanted to die, but the photo of my daughters on the screensaver of my phone reminded me that I had them to live for. I reached out to my mom and husband, confessing to all the damage I had done and my need for some serious help. And for the first time in my life, I realized how crucial it is for me to stop gambling and all that is at stake if I do not. I am now in therapy and committed to my recovery and hope to one day also help people who struggle with this disease. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne, for sharing your story. We very much appreciate it and very much wish you the best in recovery. We're going to have,
Thanks.
Thank you again for coming. We have somebody with the initial K, and I think one more after that. K, can you hear us? K, we cannot hear you. Here, now you're
Yeah.
unmuted. Go ahead.
Sorry, can you hear me? I barely can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. 1 second, let me just get this up. All right. Thank you for having me. I will make this short. A gambling disorder is a condition in which gambling becomes an addiction and interferes with a person's daily life. Hi, I am a 32-year-old female and I am a compulsive gambler. I grew up in a household full of gambling, having access to slot machines in my basement and a card table that I sat at frequently. Oddly enough, my father works for one of the largest slot machine companies and lottery providers in the world and has since 2003. I'm speaking today to inform you about my story and how gambling has destroyed my life. For the past 8 years, I have been powerless over my gambling. I knew I had a problem, but I did not admit I was an addict until September 30th, 2024, when I checked myself into a 30-day intense inpatient treatment program. I face complications because of gambling. I'm struggling with relationship and financial problems, legal, possible imprisonment, and deteriorating mental health. I remember sitting in the jail cell 5 months ago wanting to kill myself. Gambling is a trick. I thought it relieved my depression, killed my emotional pain, and delivered a sense of well-being. But I do not think I had any of the above until I became an addict. I was constantly chasing bets that led to losses, draining my savings, building debt, and turned to theft and fraud to support my addiction. I did not care about my family, friends, or now my 8-year-old daughter. I did not even care about my well-being or future. I was selfish. I've stolen sentimental items from my parents like wedding rings and antique tools. I've stolen from my daughter's piggy bank. I had my elderly grandma take out extra school loans for me. I've stolen over $500,000 from past employers. These are just a few of the reckless actions I took. I did anything and everything to get my hands on cash to gamble. Admitting my addiction to my family and friends has been very traumatic. I will forever live with guilt and shame. Gambling has destroyed me, relationships, and my health. I am lucky to be alive. As of today, I have not gambled in 6 months and will never place a bet again. I know what gambling has done to me, what it can do to others, especially the young generation that are clueless. I'm committed to my journey of recovery, and every step I take is towards a healthier me. I hope to continue to raise awareness and share my story. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Kay, for sharing your story and best wishes in your recovery journey. Thank you. Finally,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Finally, we have Joshua.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Hi, yes. Good morning. I will also try to make this brief. My name is Joshua. I'm 42 years old. I have a master's in business administration. I run my own real estate business. I don't drink and I don't do drugs, and I know exactly how gambling and math works. But despite all that, I am a compulsive gambler. My family, we have a combined household income of over $500,000, credit scores above 800. And in the last 15 years, I have gambled away over $1.5 million, nearly 70% of that, which was online, both a combination of sports betting and casino gambling. In that time, in addition to that 1.5 spent, I racked up about $450,000 in debt to fund my gambling. I had 13, because I had such good income and credit scores, I was able to take out 13 different personal loans, and I had 11 credit cards, all of which were maxed out. I was making 24 different monthly payments every single month just to maintain the loans that were contributing to my gambling. I had gone through and done an assessment of where I was spending, and I would find, going through my records, I was depositing 15 to 20 times per day. I found that depositing online was way easier than trying to go into a casino. I could just keep going because nobody knew what I was doing. I drained my family's bank accounts, my own retirement accounts, my kids' college funds. The online betting was so abstracted that I lost all concept of what money was. It impacted my health, constant stress from anxiety from lying, and not only the lying, but preparing for lying. Because my family didn't know anything about this, I was constantly creating stories and inventing stories for what I would tell them when they did start to ask questions. I gained weight, I didn't eat properly, I didn't sleep because I was betting online all throughout the night. There was it didn't matter, I could bet on a tennis game in Russia. Because it was online and on my phone, I could do it whenever I wanted. And I couldn't not watch the games. I would sometimes hide in the bathroom to watch the games, to make sure to see how things were going. I was not parenting my children. I wasn't being a partner to my wife and a husband. The trauma that my family experienced when I finally confessed to them my addiction, it's been almost a year and a half now since I let them know, and they're still recovering. And the constant barrage of advertising that we see now for legalized sports betting, when you're watching football games or basketball games, it's triggering. And as I was gambling, the more I would gamble, the bets I would make got riskier and riskier and riskier, and I would have some just crazy parlays. And one of the things that has been so difficult about this, and I think it was mentioned earlier, is that the number of people with gambling addiction therapy experience is extremely limited. There's a lot of alcohol and drugs, but trying to find a therapist that can attend to gambling addiction with that specialty is so difficult. And I almost gave up many times because I couldn't find the right people to support me. So this disease has created significant trauma, and I do feel that having it accessible online has made what was already a dangerous disease significantly worse. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Joshua. And I really want to have quickly, really would like to have quickly, if we could have Mr. Litt and Mr. Burno finish. Can you do it in 5-7 minutes or so?
Less than that, yeah. Can I just put that in the slide? There's just 1 or 2 slides I just want to get to real fast.
Okay.
You can get it to like number 7. Where you had it. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
We can see the slides now. So.
Okay, thanks. So I have 2 quick points to wrap up here on my end, and Matt may have a couple other quick points. But for me, there's just 2 quick things I want to show you. One is, and as it's been little talked about here today, what is happening across our country with young people, young adults and teens, is we literally have an epidemic of gambling addiction amongst that demographic today. All right, I put those of you sports fans, maybe remember Kirby Puckett. That's a 1985 Topps rookie card for Kirby Puckett. Kids growing up, they used to collect baseball cards and sports cards of their favorite athletes. That's how used to have to follow their teams and sports. Now kids, you talk to any middle school principal or high school principal in a state that has had online sports gambling or even commercialized sports gambling at brick and mortar for more than a year or 2, and ask them, are you seeing an epidemic of gambling on your middle school campus, in your school cafeterias, in your school locker rooms, school playgrounds? It's unreal. Okay, so that's the demographic that's paying the price the biggest by this. Okay, and just in the number one, the last only stat I'll mention on that bottom list there is in the state of New York. One of the problem gambling treatment centers there says the number 1 demographic calling gambling addiction hotlines today in that state are teens and young adults. You have moms on the phone with their 16-year-old sons calling these gambling addiction hotlines, and this is an extension of a government program that's doing it to these families. All right, the last thing I want to show is what regulated gambling, I put that in quotes, what regulated gambling looks like already in Minnesota. So when these guys stand up and say, we're going to regulate this, we're going to protect the public, excluding the tribal casinos, which have the same business model as MGM or Caesars or any of these other guys for the most part. Their business model isn't any different, but excluding those guys for a second, let's just focus on the Minnesota Lottery, which is a clear government program, okay? I pulled these off yesterday off the Minnesota Lottery website, okay? Who do you think the demographic is? On the left, those of you who are old enough, you remember in the early 1990s, Joe Camel was the iconic figure that led every state attorney general in our country to bring litigation to protect young people from getting addicted to tobacco. okay? That's on the left. That's a Christmas ad from the early 90s, as a symbol. To the right, that's a $2 scratch-off ticket sold by the Minnesota Lottery right now, okay? And one of those images was prosecuted by AGs, and the other is, hey, anything goes. They're exempt from truth in advertising laws. That's regulated gambling in Minnesota today. A cartoon-like figure of Frosty the Snowman on a scratch-off ticket, and it's a low-dollar price point, which is meant to attract young people to start gambling on it. Okay. Another quick image here. Real fast. On the left, they have a candy, a peppermint candy that's scented. Okay. Again, another low price point ticket. Why do you think they're selling scented scratch-off tickets that smell like candy? They're not targeting me, a mid-50s guy. They're targeting young people, kids, to normalize this. It's a government program doing this. On the right, you have cartoon-like figures of bucks, here, attracting kids. That's not appealing to an older demographic. Low price point ticket, a government program doing that. That's regulated gambling. The last thing I want to mention, actually, last two tickets I want to show you. This is again, polar bears, cartoon-like polar bears, scratch-off tickets. It's a $1 scratch-off ticket, again, targeted to kids. Quote-unquote, regulated gambling here in Minnesota. Last one, and most of you folks may not even know this, Minnesota House members, Minnesota members, in low-income neighborhoods across the state of Minnesota, they are selling $50 scratch-off tickets, okay, in the name of a government program to low-income people, selling $50 scratch-off tickets. That's what regulated gambling looks like. Okay, it's like putting Dracula in charge of the blood bank, because the business practices that make the most money for the state are the same business practices that that are based on addiction and exploiting folks. And with that, I won't get that last slide for time perspective. And Matt, let me know last thoughts from you.
Just two very, very brief points. Thank you, Senator. So number one, I wanted to underscore something that Ms. Sheridan Tucker said, because I think it's so important. She had said that 8 to 10 Minnesotans are impacted by every one gambling addiction or every addicted gambler. So that means even if we use the statistic that 1 to 8% of Minnesotans are able to gamble responsibly, you have to multiply that number by 8 to 10 people for the number of people who are going to be impacted. The second thing I just wanted to say, and I hope this has been implicit throughout, but I want to make it explicit before we wrap up, which is that every one of these people we heard from, every one of these recovering addicted gamblers, and every one of the people that I speak with, they're not bad or stupid people. There was no indication that this would happen to them. They were in the throes of an addiction that made them think without clarity. And it makes them do things they never thought they would do otherwise. It's the addiction. When I speak with these people and they're in recovery, they tell me about, well, I figured if I stole $20,000 from my employer, I'd win the bet, I'd put the money back, no one would ever know, I'd have a couple extra $1,000 for myself. And they realize how ridiculous that sounds now, but in the throes of addiction, that makes perfect sense. And it leads to good people doing bad things. And that's what comes with legalized sports gambling.
The antithesis of free will is being an addict. So the idea that someone who has an addict who has free will making decisions, they're completely, they're not compatible. So this idea that somehow people, chooses whatever, it's so wrong. If you're an addict, you have no free will. That's the very definition of being an addict.
Well, I wanted to ask one question in closing, and other committee members may have one or two. Your third, seventh, eighth slide, I guess, you talk about a study from the Massachusetts Gambling Commission said that after it was legalized, there were more people using the offshore, because I keep being told that, well, offshore kids can gamble on that, and they're gambling illegally, but the proponents keep saying if we legalize it, then it'll be regulated and kids won't have access to it. But you're saying that it actually looks like a fourfold increase?
There's no evidence from any jurisdiction in this country that illegal gambling is going down as a result of the introduction of online gambling. In addition to that stat from Massachusetts, we had the American Gambling Association, in their own words, saying how much it's increased. So that's part of the big con, this idea that you're reducing illegal gambling. It's a phony narrative generated by the gambling industry to create fake momentum to try to push this bill through legislatures, including Minnesota's.
Any questions from senators? If not, this hearing went longer than I intended, but I think we've been talking about sports betting for a long time, and given the fact that I think you mentioned earlier that the number of calls to gambling hotlines have gone up in a lot of states, tripling after sports betting, online sports betting occurs. I mean, I guess I really appreciate your coming. I appreciate the Ms. Sheridan Tucker and Mr. Johnson and the witnesses they brought along to talk about this, and the three researchers who presented to us. I think this is the first time the researchers have been presenting to any legislative body anywhere. So I very much appreciate your coming, and for members, all of this is in a lot of this is in the packets, the studies are in the packets and so on, and we'll be sharing with our colleagues what you've shared. With that, there's no further business. This meeting is adjourned.